In 1542, Spanish conquistador Francisco de Orellana became the first European to navigate the entire Amazon River. He returned to Spain with stories no one believed. He described cities in the jungle, millions of people, roads carved through forest, farmland stretching to the horizon, civilization thriving on a scale that rivaled Europe. Spanish academics dismissed him as a liar. The Amazon, they said, could not support large populations. The soil was known to be thin, acidic, and infertile. Rainforest nutrients existed in the canopy, not the ground. No civilization could farm that soil for long. For 400 years, the academic world agreed. Orellana was a fantasist. Then in 1960, a Dutch soil scientist named Wim Sombroek was conducting routine surveys along the Amazon River in Brazil. He was mapping soil types, cataloging the thin, red, nutrient-poor soil that everyone knew defined the Amazon basin. He found something that should not have existed. Patches of jet-black earth, deep, rich, teeming with life, scattered along riverbanks and near ancient settlement sites. Some patches covered 2 acres, some covered 200. Some were over 6 feet deep. Local farmers called it Terra Preta do Indio, black earth of the Indians. They fought over access to it. Crops planted in Terra Preta grew 3 to 4 times larger than crops in surrounding soil. It never seemed to lose fertility, no matter how many seasons it was farmed. Sombroek tested the soil. The results broke his instruments. Phosphorus levels were 200 to 400 times higher than adjacent ground. Nitrogen was elevated beyond anything he had measured in tropical soil. Carbon content was astronomical. Microbial populations were off the charts. But one finding made him sit down and stare at his data for a very long time. The soil was regenerating itself. Sites that had been farmed continuously for decades showed no decline in fertility. Some sites were getting more fertile over time. The soil was not being depleted by agriculture, it was being improved by it. No soil on Earth behaves this way. Every agricultural system in human history depletes soil. That is why fertilizers exist. That is why civilizations collapse when they exhaust their land. That is why the fertilizer industry generates $200 billion annually selling products that must be reapplied every single season. Terra Preta broke every rule. Sombroek analyzed sample after sample. In every one, he found the same thing. Fragments of carbonized wood, not ash, not charcoal as we understand it. A specific form of burned wood created through slow, oxygen-restricted fire that had been mixed into the soil by human hands thousands of years ago. The burned wood was still there, still functioning, still holding nutrients, still feeding microbial communities, still improving the soil after 2,000 years without a single reapplication of anything. Sombroek had found the agricultural secret of the lost Amazonian civilizations. The cities Orellana described were real. The millions of people were real, and they had fed themselves using burned wood that modern science had no name for. Scientists eventually gave it a name, biochar. Sombroek spent the rest of his career trying to tell the world. He published papers. He gave lectures. He begged agricultural institutions to investigate. Almost nobody listened, not because his research was flawed. It was verified by laboratories on 4 continents. Not because the method was impractical. It required nothing but wood and fire. Not because it was expensive. The raw material was free waste. Nobody listened because biochar makes the $200 billion synthetic fertilizer industry obsolete. Because you cannot sell a seasonal product to someone whose soil never needs replenishment. Because the chemical companies that dominate global agriculture cannot profit from a technique that any farmer can perform with a pile of branches and a match. Today, Americans spend $25 billion annually on synthetic fertilizers, products that dissolve in rain, products that poison waterways, products that must be purchased again next spring, products that have reduced global soil organic matter by 50% in less than a century. Meanwhile, a method perfected by people who left no written records creates permanent soil fertility from burned wood. One application, thousands of years of results. In this video, we are opening a file on the most suppressed soil amendment in agricultural history, a substance that turns dead dirt into living earth permanently. A technique older than the pyramids that the fertilizer industry prays you never discover, and the 2,000-year-old proof that everything they sell you is unnecessary. If this knowledge matters to you, subscribe and hit the bell. Every like and share preserves what they tried to erase. The vault is open. What burning wood actually creates, and why it terrifies the chemical industry. When you burn wood in a normal fire, oxygen is abundant, and temperatures exceed 800 degrees Celsius. The wood converts almost entirely to ash and carbon dioxide gas. What remains is a small pile of mineral residue, powdery, fragile. It dissolves in the first rain and is gone. This is what most people think of when they hear burned wood. Ash, temporary, worthless? But when you burn wood slowly with restricted oxygen, something fundamentally different happens at the molecular level. The process is called pyrolysis. Temperatures between 300 and 700 degrees Celsius. Limited air supply, the wood does not combust, It transforms. Volatile compounds cook off as gas and smoke. What remains is a carbon skeleton, the original cellular structure of the wood, preserved at the microscopic level, but converted to nearly pure elemental carbon, stable carbon that resists biological decomposition for centuries. Put biochar under an electron microscope and you see something that looks engineered rather than natural. Millions of microscopic pores per gram, tunnels and chambers and surfaces at a scale invisible to the human eye, the architecture of the original wood cells, now made permanent in carbon. The surface area is staggering. Scientists at Cornell University measured it. A single gram of quality biochar contains 200 to 500 square meters of internal surface area. One handful of biochar has more internal surface area than an entire football field. That is not an exaggeration. That is laboratory measurement published in peer-reviewed journals. Every one of those millions of pores becomes a habitat for soil microorganisms. Bacteria colonize the surfaces. Fungi thread through the channels. Protozoa shelter in the chambers. The microscopic architecture creates a city for the organisms that make soil alive. But the chemistry is where the fertilizer industry starts to panic. The carbon in biochar carries a negative electrical charge. In soil chemistry, this is everything. Positively charged nutrient ions, calcium, magnesium, potassium, ammonium, the nutrients plants need most, are attracted to negative surfaces. They grab onto biochar and hold on. This property is called cation exchange capacity. It is the single most important measurement of soil fertility. It determines how much nutrition soil can hold and deliver to plants. Biochar increases cation exchange capacity by 50 to 300% depending on soil type. One application. Permanent increase. Synthetic fertilizers have zero cation exchange capacity. Zero. They dissolve in water. Rain falls. Nutrients wash through the root zone and into the groundwater, into rivers, into the ocean, creating dead zones the size of small countries while your garden goes hungry 3 days after application. The fertilizer industry sells products designed to leave your soil. They must leave, because if they stayed, you would never buy more. Biochar holds nutrients in the root zone permanently. Rain does not wash them away. They remain available to plant roots for years, for decades. The Terra preta sites prove they remain available for millennia. One creates permanent fertility, the other creates permanent dependency. Now you understand the business problem. The numbers that Cornell University published, and the industry wished they hadn't. In 2003, Dr. Johannes Lehmann at Cornell University began the most comprehensive study of biochar ever conducted in the Western world. Lehmann had visited Terra preta sites in Brazil. He had seen the black soil with his own eyes. He had watched farmers grow 3 harvests per year on ground that neighboring farms could barely grow one. He came back to Cornell and dedicated his career to understanding why. His team conducted controlled trials across multiple soil types. They added biochar to degraded tropical soils, to temperate agricultural soils, to sandy soils, to clay soils. They measured everything: yields, nutrient retention, water holding capacity, microbial populations, soil chemistry. The results were published in peer-reviewed journals starting in 2006. Every number was a threat to the fertilizer industry. Crop yields increased 20 to 200% depending on soil type and crop. The greatest improvements occurred in the most degraded soils, exactly the soils that currently consume the most purchased fertilizer. The worse the soil, the more dramatic the biochar effect. Water retention improved 18 to 25%. Soil that previously drained dry within hours held moisture for days. Watering frequency dropped. Irrigation costs dropped. Plants survived drought that killed crops in untreated ground. Fertilizer efficiency increased 10 to 30%. When synthetic fertilizer was applied to biochar-amended soil, less fertilizer achieved the same results. Biochar held the nutrients that would normally wash away. Every dollar spent on fertilizer went further. The fertilizer industry should have celebrated this finding, a product that makes their product work better. But they understood the implication. If biochar made fertilizer more efficient, farmers would buy less. Less is not a business model. Soil biology exploded. Microbial populations increased 40 to 400%. Mycorrhizal fungi colonization improved dramatically. The living systems that create natural fertility were supercharged by biochar's habitat structure. And then, Lehmann published the number that the industry truly fears. One application of biochar continues improving soil for a minimum of 100 years. Not one growing season, not one calendar year, 1 century. Minimum. The Terra preta evidence suggests functional persistence of over 2,000 years. The fertilizer industry's entire business model depends on annual reapplication. You buy this spring, it washes away by fall. You buy again next spring, the cycle never ends. The dependency never breaks. The invoices keep coming. Biochar breaks the cycle permanently. A farmer who applies biochar once may never purchase synthetic fertilizer again. A gardener who amends their beds with biochar creates fertility that will outlast their lifetime. Their children will garden in soil their parents improved. The global synthetic fertilizer market generates $200 billion annually. Every dollar of that depends on soil that cannot hold nutrients without chemical help. Biochar creates soil that holds nutrients without any help at all. Lehman's research has been cited over 10,000 times. It has been replicated on 6 continents. No serious scientist disputes the findings. And yet, walk into any garden center in America, ask for biochar, count the blank stares. The carbon secret that makes climate scientists furious. Biochar does not just improve soil, it does something that no other agricultural technology on Earth can do. It removes carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and locks it underground permanently. When a tree grows, it absorbs carbon dioxide through photosynthesis. Atmospheric carbon becomes wood. This is the carbon cycle that every schoolchild learns. But here is what they don't teach. When that tree dies and decomposes, every atom of carbon it absorbed returns to the atmosphere. The cycle is neutral. The tree stored carbon temporarily. Death released it. Net impact on atmospheric CO2 over time is 0. Biochar breaks this cycle in humanity's favor. When wood is converted to biochar through pyrolysis, the carbon is locked into a molecular structure that resists decomposition for centuries. Bury that biochar in soil, and the carbon stays underground for 1,000 years, maybe longer. The terra preta sites suggest much longer. The tree pulled carbon from the air. Pyrolysis locked it into permanent form. Burial stored it in the earth. The carbon that would have returned to the atmosphere through decomposition is now sequestered underground for geological timescales. Scientists call this carbon negative technology, not carbon neutral, not carbon reduced, carbon negative. It actively removes greenhouse gases that are already in the atmosphere. The International Biochar Initiative calculated the potential. If biochar production were scaled globally using agricultural waste that is currently burned or left to decompose, the technology could sequester 1.8 billion tons of CO2 annually. That is roughly 12% of current global emissions. No solar panel removes carbon from the atmosphere. No wind turbine pulls CO2 out of the sky. No electric car extracts greenhouse gases from the air. They reduce future emissions. They do not reverse existing damage. Biochar reverses existing damage while simultaneously improving food production and soil health. One technology, 3 existential crises addressed simultaneously: climate change, soil degradation, food security. Climate conferences happen every year. Governments debate carbon credits worth trillions. Corporations fund experimental carbon capture machines that cost billions and barely work. Politicians promise net zero by dates they won't be in office to answer for. And a method that ancient Amazonians perfected 3,000 years ago already works, already proven, already available to every farmer on Earth for the cost of burning wood slowly. The fossil fuel industry cannot profit from biochar. The fertilizer industry loses revenue from biochar. The emerging carbon credit trading industry becomes less relevant if carbon can be sequestered this simply. 3 of the most powerful industries on Earth have zero incentive to promote the one solution that actually addresses their collective damage. Not zero evidence, zero incentive. The distinction explains everything. The proof. They cannot erase. The terra preta of the Amazon has been fertile for over 2,000 years. No chemical company maintained it. No synthetic product was ever applied. No annual purchase was ever made. Burned wood was mixed into soil by people who built cities in the jungle, and that soil is still producing abundant harvest today. This is not a theory. You can visit these sites. You can see the soil. You can grow crops in earth that was amended before the Roman Empire existed and watch them thrive. Modern scientists have now reproduced terra preta in controlled experiments on 6 continents. The results match the ancient evidence. Biochar works in tropical soil, in temperate soil, in sandy soil, in clay soil, in degraded farmland, in backyard gardens. The science is settled. Over 15,000 peer-reviewed studies have been published on biochar. The evidence base is larger than many pharmaceutical drugs that generate billions in revenue. Farmers who have adopted biochar report the same experience worldwide. First-year improvements in water retention and soil structure. Second-year improvements in crop yield and disease resistance. Third year and beyond, the soil transforms into something visibly, measurably different from what surrounds it. Dark, crumbly, alive with earthworms and fungal networks, holding moisture through dry spells that crack neighboring fields, growing crops that resist pests their chemical-dependent neighbors spray for weekly. The knowledge is spreading, slowly. Despite the funding gap, despite the marketing imbalance, despite the distribution barriers, farmer talks to farmer. Gardener posts results online. The information moves through channels the industry cannot control. Every person who makes biochar in their backyard becomes a permanent lost customer for the fertilizer industry. Every garden that produces abundant food without purchased inputs is proof that the $200 billion system is unnecessary. The proof has existed for 2,000 years in the Amazon. It exists today in laboratories on 6 continents. It exists in the backyard of everyone willing to burn some branches slowly and mix the results into their soil. They can defund the research, they can control the curricula, they can dominate the supply chain, but they cannot erase soil that has been fertile for 2,000 years. The vault is open.